I am excited to announce Alan Knitowski is joining me on the podcast today. This conversation has incredible insights on what's going on in the world of finance. Let's get into it. I did a little bit of digging to find out a little bit more about you, and a very interesting story. So I'm super excited for you to share it with everybody.
Nice.
And I love that somebody who is so experienced and, created a company. Funware was your company, right?
That's a funny story. Was that when I decided to leave, the second I left, and I waited about 2 weeks so I wouldn't have to report it. Then I sold all my shares and bought Bitcoin because I fundamentally thought they would drive it into the ground, and they basically did.
Really? So what year was that?
I left it formally at the end of 2022, and then 2023 they called it. They did kind of an advisory transition where they basically just had me, and in the event they needed to understand some history or continuity or things like that.
So how was it? That entire world is crazy to me, but you start this company, you build it from the ground up. It's digital transformation solutions.
Most of it was like a cloud platform that was supported with a bunch of software. So we licensed enterprise software to companies so that they could do mobile apps on iOS and Android. So whether it was iPhones when they came out, then Android, iPad, most of the extension that you would download from the App Store, we would do most of the large brands. Started with a lot of media, entertainment, and sports, because that's mostly what people downloaded when they first got a phone for the first time. And after that, we started doing more traditional things, from healthcare to government to kind of everything in between.
Yeah, that's crazy to think that you started this company. And I mean, I've watched some TV shows. I don't know if you've ever seen Succession, but it just
Sure.
reminds me of. Have you seen it? Okay. So that's my basis for what kind of happened to you. And I don't know if it's true, but it's just the way that you're dealing with board members, and you're the CEO, but you're having to meet with all these people that are making decisions about this company growing. And did you feel like you kind of were forced to make that decision?
I knew that it was untenable from my standpoint. I mean, I did it 10 years privately, 4 years publicly. To me, if I ever wrote a book, I think I'd write a book that's called Why Boards Are Fucking Useless. But it's a lot of problems when you have a lot of people that have literally no money at risk, thinking that they're going to swoop in once a quarter, act smart, and they really don't know anything about what's happening. And then they want to make decisions. It's fine to have governance. There's checks and balances is one thing. You don't want people who are sitting there stealing money and all that kind of stuff. But most of the people that are sitting on these boards, I mean, everyone has heard of Jeff Bezos, and nobody could name an Amazon board member. Everyone knew Steve Jobs, and then Tim Cook, and nobody could name an Apple board member. There's Michael Dell, and nobody could name another person from the whole company. So the reality is that when you have founding CEOs and you start and you scale and you get to the public markets, the company becomes the founding CEO or the founding team more times than not. And whenever you watch people try to add value, they typically just destroy everything, because they're doing it for a nice cushy job. They sit on 4 or 5 boards. They might get, hundreds of thousands to $1 million or more annually just to appear.
It sort of reminds me of how, when you talk about like the more people that get added to the company and don't bring actual value, and they're just end up destroying it instead. It's like when it becomes too big, it just reminds me of government, how, you think that they're starting off to help, and then they become too big and too slow, and then everyone's opinions are conflicting, and it just becomes more of like you can't move forward.
When they're exposing all the stuff going on in the government, all it's doing is helping everybody understand what they already believed. Most people who find Bitcoin, when we talk about all this stuff, you find it because you realize how rigged the system is. I'm remarried with a bunch of kids, and today's tax day, or tomorrow's tax day, right? I can't find a single good reason why anyone in this country should give a penny to the U.S. government for any
100%.
reason ever. So
Yes.
I know when we kind of dive into these things, there's so many different topics that we can kind of go whatever areas you want to talk through, but it's it's funny to me because you realize all you're doing is allowing people to steal from you. It's as bad as the Rothschild family bank, which we call the Federal Reserve. It's the same thing. Like the money is so broken that everything throughout just gets worse and worse and worse.
I want to dive into that for sure. I want to hear because I saw a post you shared with me, and I want to get into all of that because that is something that a lot of people don't understand. So I hope that if they come across this channel, they will see, your talk and hear what you have to say about that because it 100% makes sense about what's going on. And I would like you to break it down for
Sure.
us. That is definitely something we're going to talk about. Why pay taxes to the government when they could just print money, right? Especially when $14 trillion is added to the national debt in the last 12 or 14 in the last 4 years is just, people don't even care or think about that as being a problem. They just think I'm a good citizen because I pay taxes.
Yeah.
They just think that that's what they make you believe, and when you realize what's really going on, you don't think that you should have to pay any of those taxes. But I do want to kind of get to know you a little bit more first. So I want to kind of know what was your path that kind of led you there, then in turn led you to see because I feel like it's all about that journey of, also being successful, getting to where you were. What areas of interest do you have? I like to find out about that because I think that people's curiosities about how things work in life, was it political? Was it something
Right.
more around the world that you were just interested in finding out truths of some sort? How those things lead you to find Bitcoin, we can get to talking about that. But I haven't talked much about what's going on with the tariffs and all that stuff. And I would like to, if you have insights on that stuff too, that'd be great to hear
Yeah,
your
it's
perspective.
those are all easy things to talk through. And the reality is, tariffs is all we used before the Rothschilds managed to get the Federal Reserve Bank put in the early 1900s. And none of this is accidental. Why the system would melt down? It's the same meltdown of USAID, which is just a CIA front. It's not humanitarian at all. It's as disgusting as the nonprofits who give 1.5% of donated money to the cause and keep 98.5% for themselves and their buddies and their cronies. And even when I was doing my MBA and learned all about nonprofit governance, you had all these people come in and speak, and it was when I was still in the Bay Area. And all you realize is it's a little group of people that are all buddies with each other, that are all putting each other on 6 to 8 boards, and then paying themselves $100,000 to $200,000 for each board, and they're making $750,000 to $1 million a year to absolutely do nothing but fleece people under the guise of goodness.
It's evil. I mean, it really is evil. It's like they're thieves and they're stealing. The funny thing is when you find out how much with Doge now and with how much money has been stolen or sent to organizations that shouldn't have been sent to, it just makes you question so much about how the world is working. Because why wouldn't organization or something like the Pentagon, that should have the most intelligence from any place in the world, why would they not have systems in place that could track everything being spent and where it went? Why can you not audit the Pentagon?
Everything is designed not because it can't be done. It's designed on purpose to steal money and launder it. So it's kind of the same reason Julian Assange was destroyed as a human being. He had the nerve to say that all of the war that you see has no basis in reality, and the purpose is never to win a war. The purpose is to have a forever war so that you can launder the money of the West through the war effort back into a corporatocracy and elites to enrich themselves. It's kind of like Game of Thrones. I'm an ex-military guy. I'm an ex-Army Ranger, and
Yes.
when you go through and realize that there's not a single deployment that was based on any valid reason, they're all fraud. Every single deployment, every single humanitarian issue is wrapped around arms trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, and having budgets of black ops, and the governments are the ones running all these organizations.
And how long were you an Army Ranger?
I got commissioned in May of 1991, and then I got out in about August of 1996. So I sort of accidentally got recruited to Silicon Valley while I was still in the military, and it
Yeah.
was kind of a strange story how I ever even got out of the military. But yeah, we can get into all those different things.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to hear about how you got out of it too. And also, to think that, I want to tell you also thank you for your
Oh,
service.
thanks.
But it has to anger you and people like you when you have served your military, you're fighting for your country, you want to provide defense for your country. And, that is because you're risking your life to do this. Anything could happen at any point. And you're doing this thinking you're, defending,
Right.
you're a protector, you're a hero, and you're risking your life. And then when you find out why you're there,
Y-
what is the reason we're here?
Right.
What are we defending? And when you find out that it's a forever war, a piggy bank for the elites.
It's just for money making. And separate from that, there's a great book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, which goes into depth about the way in which you debt enslave non G7 countries into submission and compliance to take their natural resources, to take anything of value that they have, to drop a military base in there, to get them to vote a certain way at the United Nations. All of it is orchestrated as a means to forcibly take control of every other government, and to get them to act in the way that they're supposed to. When they don't, they try to assassinate. If they don't successfully assassinate, they often will create a war to bring in the US military because they need more power to get rid of the regime in charge. And you see it predominantly, Israel is the greatest enemy of our country, which people don't want to say out loud. Everything about Israel is responsible for most of our national debt. Uh, that's basically who the United States answers to, because anything that wasn't done with policy through APAC, which JFK tried to force them to register as a foreign agent when it was called the American Zionist Council, he was killed for it. And so when you watch, the ridiculous level of representation of pro-Israel everything in the government, it's not even natural. There's nothing about it that's normal. And then when you see Epstein, when you see Diddy, that's the blackmail operations to get people into compliance if they're not just willing to take money overtly and do it that way. And so, you don't have to really say make America great again. You just say make Israel great again, because everybody basically has Israel worship. They'll talk about we have a First Amendment, but then anything critical of Israel would be instantly called anti-Semitic. It's just dog whistles, to try to act like people are being critical because they're somehow racist or xenophobic or take your pick. That's all nonsense. It's all taught and indoctrinated K through 12, college, your whole life. And we can get into the separation of critical race theory from K through 12 as the same ideology as DEI in college, which is the same ideology of ESG, environmental sustainability and governance. And the big enforcement comes because every public company on earth, the top three shareholders are BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And that's not accidental. So the corporatocracy is what keeps the ideological enforcement. And then all these things are what we're basically fighting against. And this battle is going on between nationalists and globalists. And right now, anywhere around the world, you can see when a nationalist candidate wins, like Romania, you'll have some court come in and invalidate the election because the wrong person won. When the wrong party starts getting popular in Germany, they just ban the party. If you're in Brazil, they just arrest the opposition. They do the same thing elsewhere. That's what they're trying to do in France. France wants change. They want Macron gone because he's a globalist. And what do? They try to imprison Le Pen. It's all the same blueprint. It's, once you start seeing this stuff, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. And that's why when we find out about Bitcoin, we feel that Bitcoin is fighting that corrupt system by not fighting it, by escaping it, by just opting out.
The only reason we have war is because you can print money. If anyone couldn't print money, then war stops and you get more peaceful settings.
Yeah, because then you run out of supplies. You can't pay for the supplies. But because we have access to, and we're the global reserve currency, we have access to the money printer. So we continue to fund all this stuff and we keep the fights going. And yeah, you can't unsee it.
Sure.
With the Israel conflict, even with Russia, Ukraine, and now stuff is going on with China with the tariff war. I try to make sense of it. I mean, the what's going on in Israel, it's like thousands of years, of war going on in that area. Who is right? But one thing that I found that made sense to me, which I think a lot of people might not like me for this, maybe they would disagree, but this is just how I see things. That's the nature of war. So if you want to take over a country, if you have more brute force, you will take over that country. So when the people of Israel were forced to leave that country, it's because the people that came in were forcing them out. They left. They started to move all different places. And then I get it. They were there first, just like the Native Americans were here first. I get that you deserve to be there because you were there first, but because you were pushed out, if it wasn't for this endless money printer, if it wasn't for the backing of the US, they wouldn't have been able to fight and to push people back out so they could take over. So it's like because the US government had the means and the money printer, they were able to take over again and continue this fight, which it shouldn't have been that way.
Well, you're starting a little too late in the process. The Khazarian mafia has existed throughout history, played gypsy to relocate wherever it needed to operate its criminal hive. You have to get into why do they really hate Russia? It's all about the Bolsheviks. So the Bolshevik Revolution, they killed the Tsar and the family. The city of London and the British Crown could have provided asylum. They wanted them to get killed. They allowed them to get killed. Lord Rothschild made a deal with the British monarchy under the Balfour Declaration to create, a standing Israel. Israelis are not allowed to have DNA tests because it would prove that the actual Semites are all the Palestinians and not the Israelis. Most of the Israelis are gypsies that were forced finally after the Red Terror, the Bolshevik Revolution, out of Russia. They immigrated to two locations, Ukraine, shock, Israel, shock. So you had a lot of folks that are really Zionists who are part of the Khazarian mafia that adopted Judaism to perverse the religion. So you have to now separate religion from ideology. And really, Benjamin Netanyahu is the chairman of the Khazarian mafia. And his name isn't even Netanyahu. And he's not even, he's Polish like me. So when you really get through what's really going on, these are like family squabbles that date back thousands of years. It is the reason Victoria Nuland at the State Department created and worked with the Zionists to create the Color Revolution to overthrow the freely elected government of Ukraine. We can get into so many different areas, but I wanted to see where do you like to start your podcast and then have the conversation, or
Yeah, I like to just whatever you're like, I just like to see how things go and see what you like to talk about. I do feel like what's going on in the world right now, ultimately, I see that, Bitcoin wins. And I think whatever is happening with China and the US, because with these tariff wars, I tried to play out in my mind how this will end. And all I can think is that it's just going to be printing money from both sides, which ultimately leads to markets flooding and interest rates dropping.
It's important to talk about why Bessent is the Treasury Secretary and what did he do? Why does it matter? And what was he asked to do by Trump? So there's a lot of unique things that we can talk about through that and make sense. It's kind of funny when we talk about trade wars or actual wars. There's been a financial war going on and raging since Trump came into office the first time. We can get into how substantive that financial war actually is because most of these wars aren't played out in battlefields anymore. And we can get through, the last great desperate act of Biden-Harris attempting to outsource the entire U.S. Treasury market to the City of London and the Bank of England.
I do want to hear about that.
So when you really get into these things, no one cared about tariffs for the 50 years that we were paying them to everybody else and outsourcing our wealth and offshoring our wealth to everybody else. Tariffs are simple. You want zero, then you charge us zero. Or you
Hmm.
create manufacturing in the United States and you also get zero after you hire Americans. So there is no war. This is people worldwide who want to continue to have the US as its piggy bank and expect that nobody's going to do anything about it because now we've got, 50 to 100 years of everyone alive doesn't know anything, but they've been taught 2% inflation per year of money printing by the Fed. They think the Federal Reserve is a government organization. They don't realize that nobody in the United States has any control, and that's why none of the money that you pay in taxes goes to Americans. We're basically just a slave nation to the world, and nobody gets it because they were taught through the Rockefellers and others exactly what they wanted them to teach. It's like feminism. Um, the Rockefellers paid $35 to $50 million in the 50s and 60s and laughed about it because they wanted, all married couples to both work so they could double the tax base. Your social security number is just who gets dibs to your cash flow for your lifetime from the second you're born until you're dead. who is the beneficiary of your lifetime of cash flow? That this whole thing is all set up under a charade.
And before that happened, you were able to have a family and one income going to work, and a mother being able to take care of her children and have a good life.
Right.
Feel like you were actually middle class, but now middle class feels like they are both working. They don't have time to spend with their kids and their family. They're burnt out. They're barely able to, they're paycheck to paycheck and they're working two jobs. So it's just like the more time that passes, the harder and more you're working. And they just want us all to be consumers on top of it. Work till you're 75 or older because you can't afford to retire since your money doesn't take you as far every year. So it's just so messed up. And I think more and more people notice that as time is going on. As this inflation gets worse, people are seeing the theft and how it just doesn't, it's not sustainable. If this didn't happen where Doge is, looking through what's being spent, trying to stop the spending, the excessive spending that's really theft, using the tariffs to, stabilize things and not cause America to go bankrupt.
That's a lot of the public version. Like what actually happens is quite different from the way everybody believes.
Hmm. I want to hear if if you could enlighten
Yeah,
me.
yeah. I was just going to ask you just on the process check. So I guess on yours, are we just free forming for the whole time and then
I kind of do it different for every person. I'm
twice?
so non-traditional when it comes to
Oh, all right,
podcasting.
all
First of
right.
all, it's newer to me, but I love to just feel like it's a real talk. Like we're
Sure.
just chatting. I don't want to have too much structure. I do have questions about you previously. So maybe we can kind of go back to that, how you started, and then we'll get into some of that stuff at the end. So what led you to be so convicted of Bitcoin? Did you feel that before or after you sold your company?
I've actually been in Bitcoin for, I wouldn't say I feel bad that I was in all tech and
Mhm.
spent a lot of my career in Silicon Valley and was so busy building companies that I wasn't even paying attention to, when Bitcoin was launched. So I would say really the 2016 cycle is really when I probably got deeply involved in Bitcoin. I would say that what was also interesting is I raised about $100 million while we were private. So I started the company that I was running in 2009. And basically, almost in parallel, when Bitcoin was just getting started, I was just starting a company. So we went through 5 years and $20 million of angel funding, didn't take any institutional money. But that 0 to 5 years and all that time was so consumed with building out infrastructure, doing hiring, the normal company scaling things that go on. And when I was doing that, basically I was not really focusing on macroeconomically what was happening. I followed the markets, but I wasn't really following new developments within what ended up becoming Bitcoin in the community and the network. And so a lot of that was just a distraction. probably around 2016, we started doing some institutional raises in the private business. The first 5 years were done. 2014, we started transitioning into another $50 million of funding that actually happened right before we went public. But even before that, we did our first $30 million of institutional funding. So think $20 million of angel or seed money for the first 5 years. Then we brought in institution. It was Firsthand Technology Value Fund out of Silicon Valley. We brought in Cisco Systems, Samsung, World Wrestling Entertainment, and some other investors, including a lot of angels that were already participating in the first 5 years of that 20 million. And so when we raised that money, we started having certain investors, especially some of the family offices, that were like, hey, do you take Bitcoin or Ethereum? And so we took a look and said, why would we care if someone gave us a wire, a check, or Bitcoin or Ethereum? So when we started doing the financings, we started allowing people to invest, and we started getting Bitcoin, a little bit of Ethereum. Mostly it was Bitcoin. And we put that on our balance sheet. And so ironically, it started stacking on the corporate balance sheet long before even Saylor started doing this when he was in the public markets. So while we were private, we went through that. That created a lot of interesting board level conversations. I suddenly dove deeply into Bitcoin. We decided we were going to launch a registered security called Funcoin at the time. And it was going to be very unlike all the shit coins that I make fun of now all the time, because it was going to be a registered security. It was going to be fully audited. Everybody was going to be doxxed. And we were going to do it with full accounting, full auditing. And then we were in the process of trying to get all the way to either NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. So I had sold many companies prior to Funware. And by doing that, this time, me and my other founder, we're just like, this is going from zero to either NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, or it's going to go to zero because we're not selling it. We had sold several companies on the last companies we had done. We sold one to Cisco Systems. We sold one to Level 3 Communication. We got involved in one that we ended up selling to Internet Security Systems before they then subsequently got bought by IBM. And through that, when we started getting, Bitcoin, we didn't sell it. We didn't convert it to dollars. We just held it. And then we started getting Ethereum. We'd convert it to Bitcoin and hold it. And so that went on up until we were going public. And then when we filed our registration statement to go public, we were having crazy things happen because the SEC never saw
That's what I
anyone
was going to
with
say.
securities that were digital assets, and they had no FASB or GAAP accounting for how to deal with any of this. So we literally went 8 months back and forth with the SEC on our registration statement. And then about halfway through that, the first ever digital asset, crypto and blockchain part of the SEC was created. So the only thing worse than dealing with one public regulator is dealing with two public regulators. And when we went through that, then the chief accounting office of the SEC said, well, how do you think we should account for this? And we're looking at each other and saying, this is pretty crazy. You're asking us to determine what your accountants are supposed to do. Because we said, well, it's on our balance sheet. We have to mark it at something.
They were purposely just being vague and not helping. And they were pretty much attacking the industry, but not giving any guidance.
Correct.
And
We just tried to say, we think it should be marked to market because it trades 24/7, 365, because there are daily closing prices, weekly, monthly. We said that's the easiest. There's a cost basis, keep the cost basis, and then mark to market. Ultimately, that was not the accounting they selected, as Saylor and everybody else found out. The way they actually adopted it initially was whatever price you paid for Bitcoin was irrelevant. If you, let's say you bought it at 50,000 and then it dropped down to 15,000, but now it's currently at 85,000, you actually had to take a loss, a non-cash charge from 50,000 down to 15,000. So you'd write off 35,000 per Bitcoin as a loss, but then you had to keep it there permanently until you got rid of it. So even though it's now at 85,000 and you've made 35,000 per Bitcoin on your balance sheet and through your P&L, you were holding it at the lowest value it ever traded at after you purchased it.
Is that so that they could try to get companies to sell it at one point? Is that
That
because they
was
were
one of the
thinking,
defense mechanisms to not have anything advantageous to hold Bitcoin. They wanted you to get rid of Bitcoin. They did not want corporations, especially public companies, to hold it. So the way they tried to make that as painful as humanly possible was that every quarter, the only thing you could have was another loss on your P&L that would hurt your earnings per share. But you could never have a gain unless you actually sold it.
that's
So
crazy?
whether it was me doing it first or then Saylor going, all in with a much
Yeah.
bigger company than I was at the time, we were doing this constantly. And the lesson we learned in the 2016 market, I was traveling all over the world, predominantly in Asia, because there was no crypto market in the United States. This was even long before the end of 2017 when it spiked up to like 19,000. And that's probably when most people first started learning about Bitcoin in the United States. But back then, we'd go over into Asia and you'd spend 3 days in Singapore, 3 days in Hong Kong, 3 days in Beijing, 3 days in Bangkok, 3 days in Seoul, 3 days in Tokyo. And every meeting you would go to for these Bitcoin conferences or crypto conferences, um, all people cared about is when Moon, when Lambo. All they cared about was, oh, you're selling at $1. Can I get an 80% discount at 20 cents? And how fast can I flip it? What do you mean I have to hold it for 30 days? I just want to dump it. And that was what the market was. So I came in. You would have thought I was attacking a child in a church or something because I was saying, oh, we welcome being a regulated security by the SEC. We welcome full doxing. We welcome full audits. Nobody had ever heard that. You would have thought I was literally just committing murder on a stage because it was so bad, because they didn't want rules. They just wanted anything goes. I buy at 20 cents. I dump on people at 60 cents. I triple my money. I find the next bag. I keep doing that shitcoining thing. And we always started realizing very quickly that, there's Bitcoin and there's shitcoin. There's Bitcoin and there's everything else. And then of everything else, I didn't even want to do everything else with a public security. I was like, what would happen if I have a digital asset that's fully regulated that I can tokenize in parallel to a publicly traded security? And again, that was like heresy. You weren't supposed to talk like that. You weren't supposed
And
to
that's
do
what
things.
Larry Fink is saying now, right? He's been saying that from BlackRock. He's saying what you were saying
Yeah.
years ago.
And so it was just a funny process. So we continued. Then when I was public, we held all the Bitcoin. We had gotten rid of the Ethereum we had, but now we started having an ATM or an at the money financing vehicle, just like Saylor used. And we actually went through in conjunction, some a little bit before he did it, some after he did it, where we were actually issuing stock to get cash to buy Bitcoin. And early on, Funware ended up accumulating hundreds and hundreds of Bitcoin. And then again, when I left after 2022, the board in its idiocy sold all the Bitcoin at probably 17, 18, $19,000 in the
Oh
bear
my
market.
God. Okay.
And now it's
Yeah.
sitting, at $85,000, and they would be sitting on 9 digits worth of Bitcoin. And they have how many? Zero, not one, which again was,
Because they probably went for that whole bait that the SEC would and the regulations that were on it. They're like, well, let's just sell because it doesn't look good for our balance sheet. So they just like took that instead of realizing what they held, you know?
well, the problem is that I realized nobody could learn digital assets or Bitcoin until you actually go link your bank account to somewhere like Kraken or Coinbase, buy Bitcoin, either leave it on an exchange or take it off, put it on a cold storage wallet, and go through the custody and self sovereignty and all the things that we love about Bitcoin. But when that was going on, like I realized, like everyone on the board, no one had ever done that before. I had to force them to open accounts. I had to say, okay, we're going to give each one of you $100. Don't care if there's any amount of complexity, and you're going to learn this. You're going to learn, how do I link my bank account? How do I buy Bitcoin? How do I think about trading pairs that aren't dealing with US dollars? That's another adjustment people have to get through is Like when you stop thinking in terms of US dollars or euros or any fiat currency, how do you think about your net worth when one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin? So we just went through all that personally. We spent a lot of time with the Portopians, that all moved to Puerto Rico to avoid the taxes on all their crypto when they got into Bitcoin and Ethereum early. We used to do the Puerto Rican Bitcoin conferences down there. You had Tether get created. You had Brock Pierce and the folks who set up EOS, or Charles Hoskinson and Cardano, Brad Garlinghouse and XRP. And again, they used to not like to hear you're a shitcoin. It would be funny. We'd get into these debates and these arguments when you're traveling around the world and you're going to the same conferences, and they're like, there's Bitcoin and then there's your garbage. And you keep trying to dump it on everyone's head to take your bag so
Yeah.
that you can enrich yourself.
Yeah, that's
And
what it is.
those disagreements, those battles, those fights would happen, all the time. We were really, really interested in holding Bitcoin, understanding Bitcoin, and then using it as a strategic weapon of the company. But you realize no one you talked to on Wall Street got it. The family offices didn't get it. The financial conferences you would go to didn't understand it. Nobody wanted to spend any time to learn it. So for a while, until, Saylor came along and had a bigger venue, if you will, a bigger megaphone, and just kept doing it. I was trying to do that, but I had a slightly smaller company. And, you would have thought I'm talking Chinese or Russian every time I talk to Wall Street, because they wanted to spend not even 5 minutes to learn anything.
That's crazy because they love their system of theft, and they're like, well, it's benefiting us, so why would we try to get this new thing? Like, we don't want it because they think it's attacking this the system that they love,
Right.
So that's why I think it's great that you saw it, because you were forward thinking. You're a technology builder, company builder, and you were able to see that, so everyone else isn't the builder. They're the ones investing in your company. You're the one with the vision.
Sure.
So when you have the vision and you see what's going on, they're not the ones that see that. They didn't do the work. They don't know how you think. It's crazy to think that people fought you and you were, they don't want to learn. They didn't want to take the time.
Well, even when I did my road show, me and my CFO did a road show, and we were just talking about enterprise software, which is something that Wall Street was theoretically supposed to understand. And then I would go on the road show and you'd meet people managing $1 billion or 500 million or 5 billion. It didn't really matter. And they would say, well, what does your software support? I'm like, it does all the infrastructure support and all the support on the applications that are the mobile applications you download and use on your phone, on your smartphone. And they're like, what's an app? And I said, are you kidding me? You're managing $1 billion and you don't know what an app is. I'm like, so finally I grab them and I go, do you have one of these? And they're like, oh yeah, well, that thing is called an app. You don't
My
understand
goodness.
that. Okay, let me, so I'm like backing up, right? And I'm going, okay, you have to do your banking, or you're traveling on American Airlines. What do you do to get your boarding pass? Or what do you do to do a deposit? And you're realizing that they're managing all this money. They have absolutely no idea what even the most basic technology is, even when they're using a phone. They didn't understand it was called an app. They didn't understand what the app did. And we're almost talking to them like they're children, trying to help them
Yeah.
understand that. And then when you transitioned into, oh, let me talk to you about a digital security called Funcoin and our balance sheet approach with Bitcoin. Wait a minute. Don't you do software? What is a what coin? A
Oh my God.
Bitcoin. And you're realizing that, like, I felt like I just needed to have little helmets put on and put me in the short bus and drive around Wall Street. Uh,
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. And it's not just you're telling a regular person, you're telling people that are managing billions of
right.
dollars, and they're looking at you like you're insane. Like, they're the same people, the same type of people that were saying the internet is a passing fad, and they don't understand technologies that are coming out and how they accelerate. And they look at you like you're crazy. And it's I can't believe you had to
Well,
explain a
it
simple
was even
thing.
worse because then also you're doing this, right? So then Wall Street wealth management thinks, oh, these people have assets. We want to pitch them on managing, some of their employee assets or some of the individuals that work at the company that, made a lot of money assets. All logical things. So I would go into those conversations with wealth managers and I would say, what do you think a portfolio should look like between digital assets, physical assets, and financial assets? And I said, and if you don't want to call them digital assets, you could call them virtual assets. That's fine. Like digital or virtual assets is one bucket, physical assets with another bucket, and the final bucket of financial assets. And we would literally have to spend 15 minutes trying to talk about what digital or virtual assets even are. And I'd even try to say, okay, like let's forget everything that's possible and we'll just say Bitcoin, physical assets, financial assets. And you would have thought that was, again, the most bizarre conversation because none of them knew anything about it.
I
Allocation
find that
was zero, or, oh, our banks, we're Morgan Stanley. We're not allowed to do that. We're Goldman Sachs. You can't buy that stuff. That's risky. And I'm like, wait a minute. So after time is going by, 16, 18, 20, I'd have this conversation every couple of years. I'm like, so you've successfully kept out every one of your clients from the best performing asset on earth for 8 of the last 10 years. Congratulations. What a great wealth manager you are.
that's what I'm saying. The people that manage the most money in the world, because they're so used to their system, they refuse to even open their eyes. You're managing this kind of money for people, for your company. You should look at forward moving, you should have vision, that should be your job instead of just sitting there, blindly being ignorant and enjoying your life and thinking, everything just comes easy to me because it does. Why don't you look to see what's changing in the world? This world is changing quickly and they're completely ignorant, and
But
it's
if you
amazing
understand
to
that
me
they
that.
don't want change because Nasdaq and the New York Stock Exchange are captive and they're only open 5 days a week and Bitcoin is 24/7 365.
But that's what's crazy, that they don't understand that because they manage the most money in the world, and because they don't ask the question about what is money and how it's being devalued and how this affects, they don't think about these questions and how the world could be reshaped. Maybe you should think about this stuff. Maybe they think, even if it's not going to be something, even if it is risky, why not put like 0.5% of your portfolio into it for that? You know what I mean? Just to
Well,
diversify like they
I
like to
talk to
do.
people to this day. I'll go out golfing and meet somebody that has absolutely no Bitcoin. And I'm like, aren't you a little intellectually curious about any of this? And I said, I tell you what, I said, how about as a friendly wager? I'm like, why don't you take 1% of your net worth, just one, and then buy Bitcoin with it. And then every year to 5 years, we'll just keep monitoring and see what percent of your net worth it represents as time passes. And then over time, and they're like, oh, well, what do you do with your? And I'm like, I have an entire open source Bitcoin-centric wealth flywheel that I put on X. And I'm like, I do this for everyone and it works really well. So here, I'm even going to post it and make it available for everyone else to emulate if they want. And I just want you to not have to have fun staying poor. How can this be hard?
So what is the flywheel? What is
And everyone started learning from Saylor evangelizing about Bitcoin for corporations and how to use it as a strategic asset, as corporate treasury. Um, I did a version of that trying to educate my board, trying to educate our shareholder base. But again, I had started that when we were private through the SEC period while we were public, and we were very constant about it. But I did have change on the board over time. And I even had a chairman who was a woman who used to be the CFO of JP Morgan's investment bank. And when she was chairman and I was CEO, I said, okay, for our strategic review this year, I'd like to try something a little bit different. I am going to do everything for our next 3 to 5 year plan based on putting everything in Bitcoin terms and Bitcoin as a treasury asset and a Bitcoin standard for the company. And then I want you to actually defend the US dollar and you to do all the budgeting in US dollars and our strategic plan in US dollars. And at first she looked at me and sort of laughed, and I didn't laugh back. And I said, I'm completely serious. And she said, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. And I said, I want to have a debate with our entire board about the US dollar and Bitcoin. I said, okay, let's start with a simple question. How many total US dollars are there? And of course, you can't tell me. I know there'll never be more than 21 million Bitcoin because it has a fixed supply. So what do you think happens over time if more of this is printed and this is not? And when you're looking at inflation rates, I would look at it and say, okay, the Federal Reserve and the thieves that they are tried to teach everyone that 2% per year is the magic number. That's our target. What is that? The most amount of theft they can get away with without us dragging them in the streets and killing them effectively. So they're like, how much can we steal and debase the currency like the Romans and the Greeks did when they chipped little pieces of the gold or they melted it and put some impurities? That was their version of money printing. And we go through all this, right? And you see this 2% is a problem. So even with my own board and everyone I would talk to, I'm like, okay, let's talk about math. We can disagree about a lot of things, but math should hopefully be math. So 2%, over 50 years of my adult working life, I'm going to lose half of my wealth. Half of my wealth. So if I started at like 20, worked to 70, give or take, it's not exactly 50 years for everybody, but give or take, we'll call it 18 to 68, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
You work, you stop working. At 2% per year, you lost half your wealth in those 50 years because math. Now,
because math.
More recently, we printed so much money in the last 5 years. You can look at different estimates that say if we printed 50%, 60%, 80% of all dollars that have ever existed as we went to 36 trillion in debt and 1.2 trillion a year in interest, which is 100 billion a month, again, because math. So I said, okay, when I was actually doing cost of capital, I would do strategic planning at 25% cost of capital because I thought the CPI and the PPI were lying about actual inflation.
Yeah, they are.
I said,
yeah.
look, I can see what healthcare costs were last year. I see what they are this year. I see what they're proposing next year. That isn't 2%.
It's like 40.
It's like 40, right? So I'm like, okay, so I use 25. Let's say they say it's 2. And let's say I'll split the difference and try to act conservative and I'll pick 14%. So at 14%, because math, I actually lost half my wealth in 5 years. Not 50, 5.
5.
So when you go, you just stole
Wow.
half of my family's wealth in 5 years, and you really don't want me to drag you into the street, put a bullet in your head, throw you in jail, arrest you, banish you from our country. What exactly do people care about? And this again,
And this is only your conservative estimate of 14%.
yes, that's me being really nice.
Crazy.
And so when you run the math and you say, okay, if we don't fix the money, there's no chance to fix the world. But what does that really mean? And it's like the 2% is already theft. 25% or more is obscene. You're getting into, what are we going to be? Weimar
Slavery.
Germany? Are we going to be
Yeah.
Venezuela? Like Zimbabwe?
That's what hyperinflation looks like. Yeah.
So you can see that, there was 5,000 years of gold. We have 100 years of fiat currency experiment that is going horribly wrong, as it does with every fiat currency. And then to me, we'll have 5,000 years of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But when you're going through these conversations, most people feel the pain, but they don't understand the cause of the pain. And they want to say, oh, it's Trump. Oh, it's Biden. Oh, it's the Uniparty. Oh, it's the WEF, the World Economic
It's
Forum, and the
China.
globalists. The reality is it's the bankers and it is the money. And you have to start there. And then you have to understand, okay, at 2%, I need to at least have a raise every year, even if they're doing that to break even. If at 25%, who's getting a 25% year over year raise every year in their commissions or their salary or their bonuses or their stock? That's pretty tough. So now you find Bitcoin and you're like, wait a minute, this thing has grown 50% combined annual growth rate year after year after year for all these years. And even if it slows down to 45, 40, 35, 30, that's still a lot higher than 25, definitely up from 14 and wildly higher than 2.
Yeah, so when you think about it, on the other hand, in the last 5 years, they've taken half of your wealth with a conservative estimate of 14% instead of 50 years. You can say that maybe because you're only using 14% and not 25 or higher, not 40, if you're only using 14%, you can use that same calculation to say that my wealth will grow double in 4 years instead of reduce by half.
Exactly. That's what
Can
led me into that Bitcoin wealth flywheel. So then what I did is I said, okay, if I learned all this in the corporate world, Saylor's preaching it and I preached it at a smaller level and others are preaching it, great. Corporations will figure it out. Governments will start figuring it out. That's fantastic. So what I did is shifted and said, I believe Bitcoin as a core should be the basis for wealth. So from that, I developed a model and did a little experimentation because some of the instruments didn't exist. Some were just coming online. I mean, we didn't even have a Bitcoin ETF until January of last year. People already forget it's only been like 15 months. It's not been very long since we've even had a Bitcoin ETF. So what I did is in my model, I came up with an allocated percentage that I said, okay, if you work for a living, you get paid bonus, commission, salary. You get some money because you sold a baseball card collection, some artwork. You got rid of some junk at a yard sale and have some cash, whatever it was. You got a gift for Christmas, for graduation. What I tell people is, okay, the first 10% off the top, if you got $10,000, take $1,000, set it aside. You're going to live off your 9,000, but that 1,000 you're going to go drop in somewhere like Schwab or whatever your preferred place is. And then of that $1,000, you're going to distribute it. And how are you going to distribute it? So I said 60% of it to me is Bitcoin. Now, 40% of it is cold storage Bitcoin. So I'm talking about you go to Coinbase or you go to Robinhood or Venmo now or PayPal or wherever you like to buy. Kraken is my preferred, safe exchange. But if you're going to buy the Bitcoin, you buy it. Then as soon as the trade settles, of course, you need to get it all off exchanges. Don't leave anything there. Buy a Trezor wallet, learn self-sovereignty, self-custody, all the security measures around it. But 40% or $400 of that 1,000 is going to go into cold storage Bitcoin. I say 60% Bitcoin because the next 20% is the BlackRock ETF, IBIT. I picked BlackRock specifically for a couple reasons. One, it's got over $50 billion of assets, so it's super liquid. On top of that, it has the largest and deepest and most liquid option market. And then on top of that, it's BlackRock. So it's as reasonably safe with cash in and cash out that some of your accounts can't hold actual Bitcoin, but you can use whether it's a retirement account or not a retirement account. Most brokerages will let you buy ETFs. So you can go buy, IBIT, and that gets you up to 60% MSTR
okay.
because that 10% gives me levered Bitcoin exposure to the 525, 35,000 Bitcoin that Saylor has as the largest corporate holder. So now you're at 40 cold storage, 20 in the ETF, that's a financial version of Bitcoin, 10% that's in Saylor. The next 10% now that I've changed recently is GameStop.
Mm,
And I added GameStop for the same reason as Saylor, that they're going to start deploying capital. Obviously, they have more than $5-6 billion that they can deploy. They're debt free. But I also like GameStop because I know that none of the issues that caused GameStop to go vertical have ever been resolved. So at a simple level, the amount of shorts against GameStop far exceed the number of shares that even exist. And they've been trying to use derivatives and other transactions to try to hide this and kick the can forward. and try to mask, $1 trillion worth of derivative exposure. So I believe that there's a big opportunity for the equity appreciation of GameStop in a profitable company that's debt free. And I've seen the result of a corporate treasury going from all cash to all Bitcoin, during that window.
So did GameStop, I'm surprised that after what happened in like 2021, I think it was, I'm surprised that there's still that much shorting going on in the stock. I didn't realize that it was that heavy.
The issue
So
is that if you look at the statistics, it doesn't look like there's very much shorting on a relative basis. The problem is that the reason for that is there's synthetic shorts. There are naked shorts. And the way they're trying to hide the synthetic and the naked shorts is burying it into derivatives and then holding these things on balance sheets buried as much as humanly possible. And you have to read the fine print in the 10Ks and the 10Qs. The Bitcoin community and the GameStop community do a pretty good job of highlighting, oh, wait a minute, they just highlighted this $1 trillion. That's a little problem, but they won't really say what's inside that trillion. But most people can kind of figure out where the synthetic shorts that were never resolved, we were all led to believe, GameStop and the meme stocks like AMC crashed. So I just like that I know where they're at in the cycle. That's never been resolved. And between the two largest shareholders, one that sits on the board working for free and, the old roaring kitty, they still know none of that's been resolved. So that's why I incorporated them more recently when they made those announcements. So now you're at, 40 cold storage, 20 in the BlackRock ETF. The next 20 is really MicroStrategy and GameStop. So that's at 80%. Now, what do you do with the last 20%? I don't always know what the price of Bitcoin is going to do, but I generally know it's going to bounce up and down and be volatile. I don't always know what MicroStrategy is going to do, but I know it kind of bounces up and down and it's volatile. So on the last 20%, I split it 5, 5, 5, and 5 between 4 ticker symbols. MSTY, which is solely designed to monetize the up and down volatility with all of the covered calls and other instruments that it writes against the volatility in the price of MicroStrategy. And then the last 15% is all Bitcoin oriented, but they pay monthly dividends, just like MSTY. 2 of them pay monthly, 1 is weekly. So there's YBIT, which is a yield max Bitcoin that is off the volatility of that. There's Maxi, MAXI, which is another one off the volatility of Bitcoin. And then the final one is called YBTC, which is a yield max of Bitcoin, except it pays every Friday. So the reason I picked those 4 is because we all hear, I don't have any more cash to deploy. I'm all in on Bitcoin. How can I dollar cost average? How do I buy the dip? How do I this? How do I that? So what I did is come up with a model where you hold your Bitcoin cold storage and forget about it. You hold your BlackRock and forget about it right now. You hold your MicroStrategy and GameStop and forget about it, except for a couple things. On those positions, because they're public securities, I can write covered calls. So like on a Wednesday of the week, if MicroStrategy was at, I don't know, call it $300, I could write a covered call at $350 strike price for Friday. I can collect the option premium. And the first thing I do is buy more IBIT to get more Bitcoin in my stack. It's my financial Bitcoin. Then what I'll do is I could write covered calls against GameStop. So if it's at $27, I could write them at 30, closing on Friday, collect the premium, IBIT. Every now and then I'll take the covered call premium. If MicroStrategy dropped down to 250, I might add a little more in there. Or GameStop, after it announced its offering, went from 28 down to 21. So I bought some more GameStop. But I keep those positions. Those last 4, though, every Friday I get, it's like Christmas. I get my dividends Friday morning pre-market from YBTC, and they might pay 30 to 50 cents or more per share. And as soon as I get that cash, guess what I do? I buy IBIT. Or if there was big dips, I could go back and fill out my MicroStrategy or my GameStop Flywheel a little bit more. Or I could take the cash and go off and buy and add to my cold storage Bitcoin. And then those other 3, it's interesting. they're all on a different week of the month. So YBIT, Maxi, and MSTY are all on different weeks. So last Friday, I got the MSTY dividend. This Friday, they'll announce YBIT paid off the following Monday. And the following week, it'll be Maxi. So I've set it up where YBTC, I get 4 dividends per month every Friday that I can dollar cost average and buy. And then what I've been doing is put all the rest of the money into, I said 5, 5, 5, 5, because it's easier for people doing a portfolio to do it that way. What I actually do personally now is Misty gave me the dividend. I sold all of it, bought all YBIT. So I have the biggest amount of cash. Then I get the YBIT. Then I'll sell it all. Then I go and buy Maxi, get that dividend. And I just kind of, and then one week I'll put it all into YBTC because there's only 1 week out of the month where the other 3 aren't paying a dividend. And so that's a combination of all the cash I get. And then I call it a wealth flywheel because I'm going to generate option premium and then buy. I'm going to generate dividends and buy. And you can even use some of the cash to do like cash secured puts. So I could make double option premium. MicroStrategy's at 300. I could write covered call options against what I already hold at 350. And I could write cash secured puts at 250. So odds are, it's volatile, but it usually isn't going to jump 50 or drop 50 in a week. It can happen, but that's why I do it on like a Wednesday because, again, it can happen, but it's 48 hours, not likely. So I'm collecting premium on the bottom, premium on the top, buying more IBIT, and you just keep doing this nonstop.
Well, on your when you have this link posted on your page on X, do you explain where you could do these trades and where and how how the cover calls work, like for people that don't understand, so they could figure out how to do what you're doing?
Yeah, what I've told people on that is YouTube's still good for at least that, where they're very, very simple. Covered call is the safest strategy in the world. Like if you own 300 shares of MicroStrategy, you could write 3 options because each option is 100 contracts. There's nothing magical about it. The worst case scenario is if it's at 300, you write at 350. Odds are anytime it stays 350 or below, you collected the premium, you added to your financial stack of Bitcoin, and you still have 300 shares. If it went 350 or higher, okay, you're going to get paid out as a sale of those 300 shares at 350. Remember, you wrote it at 300, so you still got $50 of appreciation, plus the premium you put into Bitcoin. So that's probably gone up if MicroStrategy's gone up $50 in a couple days. But yeah, you can go to YouTube to learn the trading. And what I found is, I've used all the big Wall Street firms and others. Charles Schwab works great. I've got like 30 accounts that I can do there through one simple login. And I can do all of that trading at Schwab. If you like Morgan Stanley and some of the others, they won't let you buy crypto oriented things. So maybe Fidelity would be another option. But anyone telling you you can't buy these publicly traded securities, you need to run from those groups. Sort of like anyone you say, please wire me $10,000 to this bank account. And if they say, what are you using it for? And then I say, Nunya. And they're like, what's Nunya? And I say, none of your fucking business is what Nunya is. Like, no, I'm not here to tell you what I'm doing with my money. Like, are you out of your mind? Like, this is none of your business.
I know. They're not your parents.
Right. So, but I watch that. I have folks that, do investments with me and other stuff. And, they've now, some of them like Bank of America or Wells Fargo, and they're trying to, it's one thing to say, I'm verifying your identity. I'm going to make sure it's you before I do a transaction. I'm going to use authentication. Like, I get all that.
Right.
Or I want to talk to you on the phone and we have a voice print. We want to verify it's you. God bless you. But as soon as you stop that and you transition to, hey, Staci, what are you going to do with this $10,000? And you're like, I'm not here to answer to you for any reason. Shut up.
Right.
And then they act
It's
surprised.
your money. Yeah.
I'm like, really? Sometimes I'll get obnoxious with them. I'll ask them a wickedly personal question. And they're like, what? How could you ask me that? And I'm like, that's about as offensive as what you just asked me and what I'm doing with my own money.
Especially when it comes from bankers who don't even understand what money is. Like, you're asking me what I'm doing with my money, and you're going to tell me Bitcoin is risky. That's what you're going to say.
Yeah, and don't just talk the talk. I walk the walk. I'm remarried, so I had 4 children. My wife's runs a dental practice, Dr. Jenny, and she's awesome. And she had 3 kids. So it's interesting because our kids are, with the exception of one who's 19, going to the University of Miami, finishing up his first year of college. The others are basically 23 to 26, and all of them are educated, great careers, and working now. So the introduction and shock of like taxes is fascinating to watch, a kid going like, why are they taking this money? I already paid taxes on my income, and going through the mental gymnastics of the theft. But I've got several of my kids that actually their W-2 payroll goes directly to Strike. They instantly convert it to Bitcoin. They use the bill
Amazing.
pay feature that Jack Mallers set up. They stack in Bitcoin, and then they pay off their bills. And then as Bitcoin keeps appreciating, their life gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Not only my own kids do it, one of the golf pros does this. He's awesome that he does it too. And I sit down and I talk and I show them like, here's how you can do this in practice. And they have all the tax, forms and things is automated. Hopefully the IRS goes away in the next year or two, due to
That'd be great.
tariffs. But in the interim, like Jack's done a great job of getting everything, that you can send a report to your accountant if you have gains or losses on the purchase or sale of Bitcoin to cover the payments. But my kids do that. My kids make sure that
Love
they
it.
understand what money is. I spend a lot of time with them to distinguish. And what's great is on my wife's 3 kids, my stepkids, you know, one works at Los Alamos, has a nuclear engineering background, and works on weapons. She has twin
Amazing.
daughters. One is about to start medical school to be a doctor like she is, in July. The other one is about to graduate nuclear engineering and will go to Charlotte and work on nuclear reactors with Duke Energy.
Smart kids.
So they're super sharp and smart. My kids have all taken more of a business route, with entrepreneurship. My one daughter just finished grad school at the University of Miami, where I went as an undergrad. She was awesome as class valedictorian for that. Got 2 degrees in 4 years, and now she's a management consultant down in South Florida. Another one went to Oregon. She's doing great out in Los Angeles, and she's doing the business exec thing as well. They all kind of look at entrepreneurship and, how do you sign the front of the check instead of the back of the check and all these things.
So do you feel like with your kids, like for people that have kids that want to see them succeed, and you're teaching them about Bitcoin, which is great, and they're paying their bills out of Strike and just converting over to that life. And but when you like, do you feel like your army background had something to do with your discipline, with the kids growing up so that they could have this good strength and vision, to be disciplined the way they are? Or do you feel like they just kind of took over your personality of also believing you that you know what you're talking about, so they could follow, like they admire you and follow your lead and type of
Yeah,
things
it's
like
funny
that?
that there's a lot of stuff where your parents get smarter as you get older. The more detached you get from the indoctrination of college, teaching you everything incorrectly or not at all, and then you start experiencing the real world. It's a big difference. Like, so our kids have been blessed that they don't have auto loans, they don't have student loans, they don't have credit card debt. And then we focus on making sure that they understand when you put something on a credit card, that balance goes to zero as soon as you get the bill. And they've also started from when they were little kids, said, okay, great. You got a Christmas gift for $100. Give $10 to me because it's going into your Schwab account. My father and my mother never went to college. So I was the youngest of 3 boys. All 3 of us have done very, very well. But my dad was a Mason. My mom worked at a junior high library. We grew up lower class, maybe upper lower class if we were lucky. We always, had shelter and food and things like that, but we never really had a lot, but didn't really realize it. All of us were told, hey, even if we had money, we couldn't pay for you to go to college. So you have to earn it. And this is the greatest country in the world. If you get off your ass, you're not lazy and you work, you can do anything in this country. And that was how they brought us up. So my oldest brother worked full time while going to the University of Arizona. That was brutal. Got through his college because that was the only way he could pay for it. And now he's successfully run his own business for decades and doing amazing. My other brother went right out of high school, decided to go in the Navy nuclear program, served 15 years. That was how he then got his degrees while he was in the Navy and going through all that. Now he's an
Yeah.
expat with Saudi Aramco and has had a very successful career. And then I went to Miami on an ROTC scholarship because I couldn't afford to go to Miami, but I was a high school valedictorian, fortunately, which was my path to get out and have a chance to go to college. So I went to Miami, got commissioned as an aviator. I got an educational delay, so I went to grad school at Georgia Tech, which for my field was first in the world for about 20 years in industrial and systems engineering. Sadly, I lost my pilot slot because I had 2 engineering degrees and they said needs of the Army. So I ended up losing my aviation insignia. They gave me Corps of Engineer insignia because of my 2 engineering
Oh,
degrees, sent me to Ranger School, and then I deployed to the DMZ and spent a year on the 38th parallel during the North Korean nuclear inspections back in the day from a long time ago. And ultimately, when I got out of the military and got recruited to Silicon Valley to go work there, as there was about 49 out of 50 of us hired by Northern Telecom were ex-Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine officers. And I did an MBA at the University of California at Berkeley, which was funny being ex-military at Berkeley, God forbid. But I did that while I was working. And so what I think happens in life is that your kids see how hard you work. The very first company I ever started, me and our co-founder put our house as collateral to get our Dell equipment and all the other stuff. And it was like, okay, this has to work or we lose our house. So nothing kind of gets you as motivated and as focused to make progress successfully as you're going to lose your house if it doesn't work out.
and you've told your kids these stories.
Yeah, and I
Like
also
you
told
know,
them, I said, look, you guys all were so little when I then sold the company to Cisco that if you've never really had to see what it's like and the sacrifices that go into it. You've just grown up literally being born on third base and you have to stagger down the line to fall on home plate to score. But, you know, it doesn't matter how smart you are if you don't work hard. It doesn't matter how smart you are if you're not disciplined. And then I said, like all these things, no one's really going to teach you. I said, the biggest revelation in my life was I went through 3 great college programs. Miami, Georgia Institute of Technology, UC Berkeley, Master of Science and Engineering, Master of Business Administration, did all that. And nobody in all that taught me anything about money.
right? Isn't
Nobody
that insane?
teaches anything about even the basics of debt and money and investment and assets and all of it. So you kind of get forced to throw in and I ended up getting really good at it, not because I was born that way or someone magically trained me. I kind of did it on my own because I realized no one's going to teach me this stuff. So I've got to go do the work. And
Right.
when I sold my first company to Cisco, for about 8 of us, I got a private wealth management deal with Goldman Sachs. That was great to realize how stupid they were. And they had a bunch of kids that were in their 20s right out of school that were using OPM, other people's money, to try to learn their craft at wealth management. And they knew nothing about anything. They literally just thought the best things were whatever Goldman Sachs did, and that's what you were supposed to invest in. And so it was a good experience to realize, I couldn't get Goldman IPO access, even though I was a Goldman client, because I wasn't wealthy enough. If you're just a millionaire, a decamillionaire, that didn't matter. You needed to be a, centimillionaire or a billionaire. Then you got the good Goldman team. So I basically cashed out of everything from Goldman Sachs, moved everything to Schwab, told everyone there that wanted to help me, I don't want any of your help. Just help me get the paperwork and the accounts set up and I will care about my own money because nobody gives a shit about my money more than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So that forced
Amazing.
me to learn it. And then as I learned it, I realized that each of my kids and now my stepkids, like they'll come home over Christmas or something and we'll sit down and spend a couple hours almost like doing class training on. I said, look, if I get hit by a bus, I said, I hope I'm here for a long, long time. But if something ever happens to me, all of this is wasted unless you guys know how to do it yourself.
Right. So that's great that you're not only telling them about, you're some parents, they don't give their kids their time. They don't talk to them about, they don't tell their stories, but you actually discuss with them where you came from, what you've done. You actually take time for your kids and you teach them what you've learned now so that they could have that for their future. So they could be educated on stuff that you had to teach yourself. But
Yeah, and there's a great book called Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis, who's written a lot of fun books, Moneyball, The Big Short, and all those kind of things that many became movies. But Liar's Poker told the story of when he was a 20 something as a wealth manager getting paid $500,000 on Wall Street. And he said he didn't know a damn thing about what he was doing. And he was playing with
Mhm.
other people's money and they didn't understand anything about it. But it's a great, funny representation with all sorts of good information. And once you read it, you'll never let someone manage your money again in your lifetime.
Well,
And
I'm gonna write that one down.
yeah, what I tell my kids and everyone that I know is, I'm like, look, there's a lot of stuff in the world you can outsource. You can outsource doing your yard maintenance, cleaning your house. I said there's one thing you never outsource, which is managing your money. I said you guys have the benefit of you can trust me because I'm your dad and I'm going to take care of you despite you not knowing how to do it. You're going to learn it all because you're never going to trust a third party, and God forbid something happens to me or you get married. Um, you know, Getting married is a whole different experience because even anything you might know, then you have this expectation that your spouse is going to be like you are. Bitcoin as an asset is highly volatile as an asset, but it's also highly volatile to relationships
Mhm. Yeah.
because you're like, stop buying that. No, there's a dip on, that stuff is very real. And
Mhm.
when you meet,
And unless your spouse knows it too, then they're gonna be scared.
yeah, so it's good that I even found, getting married a second time, that was a whole process of just talking about money. Everyone I've met that makes a lot of cash, doctors fit that role, lawyers fit that role, but they're brilliant at making amazing livings. But through all that education and all that amazing talent, they too don't really get a lot of training on money or investment or wealth. And so, much like anyone who gets into crypto, I always say I hate crypto. I love Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I think you really need to understand the difference. But I always tell people, you need to lose money for you to realize there is no such thing as diversification of digital assets. You don't go to Coinbase and buy $100 of 10 different things because they have 10 different offerings and you're diversified. That's stupid.
Right.
Um,
Well, and the people that are the ones who don't understand this stuff, they're the same people who uh, when you talked about the IRS or being abolished, or maybe the Fed in the next, I don't know if you said IRS or the Fed, but in the next like year or two, but those are the same people that will tell you like that'll never happen. Are you crazy? But when you understand what's happening in the world, it could be possible. And
sure.
you do see that because you could see that a lot of people are becoming aware to the fact that nobody knows what the hell they're doing with money and they just trust these people that are stealing from them. Do you really think that in the next year or two that could
Yeah, I think
be a
that the
thing?
reality is more and more people are going to learn all about Jekyll Island and the fraud that was brought on humanity, especially in the United States. Because when you go back in our history, whether Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Jackson, president after president after president from when we were set up, made sure that central banks did not exist in the United States. It was not until the Titanic sank that magically Woodrow Wilson decided to ram through the creation of the Federal Reserve during a holiday window, which then was accompanied by two interesting organizations for enforcement, the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigations. So one was going to be the Gestapo for enforcement, and the other was going to, keep the accounting for the Rothschilds. The entire Federal Reserve is a joke. Everyone knows it's not federal. They have no reserves. It's an international cabal of bankers who are trying to basically issue money for free to governments and then force governments to pay back principal and interest so they can enrich themselves. The three biggest, wealthiest groups on earth are the Saud family at $5 trillion, the Rothschilds at $3 trillion, George Soros at $1 trillion. And then in parallel, you have all the investment vehicles that are used to own the top three positions of every public company traded on earth on every exchange, which is Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. And all you got to do is jump on Yahoo Finance, pull up, the institutional holders, and you can pick anything you want. You're going to find the same exact owners. And then what happens? All this money typically gets routed from those core families and the big money managers into a series of very difficult to trace foundations. One is George Soros himself, the Open Society Foundation, the Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation. You get the Zuckerberg-Chan Initiative, another big foundation, of course. And you work through each one of them, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So think of three fronts of asset managers, three major families with other sort of ties between, and then all these bogus nonprofits that are all set up for profit under the guise of humanitarian assistance and all these initiatives. And then we've seen one of them sort of starved, obviously USAID, which is the rogue intelligence agencies under the guise of humanitarian assistance, which is why when you saw President Trump abolish USAID, you didn't see a single non-G7 president of any country on earth say, oh my God, we're going to lose all these benefits if you stop funding it, because they know that the USAID is designed to do regime change and to assassinate them and to take over their countries. And
you're right. I didn't hear anything about anybody having backlash on that from other countries.
never,
I just hear
because
that.
they know that that's there to destroy everyone in Central, South, and Latin America. They know that that was designed to fund the color revolution that overthrew the Ukrainian government to put in a puppet named Zelensky by Victoria Nuland and a bunch of congressmen. And this is a slush fund, and it always has been. And that's why these people making $174,000 a year after working 10 or 20 years in government suddenly are worth 30 million, 80 million, 150 million, 300 million. It's all a joke. But when you trace the money and you say, okay, the Saud family, the Rothschilds, Soros, then you've got all the nonprofits that are these foundations, the three asset managers that each own themselves, of course, because it's all the same money. And then USAID, what did they do? They funded the shadow government, the non-government organizations, which are solely funded by the government to do what the government is banned from doing. And then all the nonprofits, which are a complete joke. And I say this even as a Catholic, watching their budgets go from 20, 30, 40 million a year to $500 million or $1 billion a year times hundreds and hundreds of these to facilitate the illegal immigrant invasion of America, or the human trafficking, the drug trafficking, the arms trafficking, the sex trafficking, God forbid, with kids. And here we go. Then you have blackmail. So like you start really putting all these pieces together. It's just all bullshit.
Yeah, it just they're the modern day mobsters. They're the ones bringing in all this terrible stuff and causing all these bad things to happen.
So to your question about we don't need an internal revenue service at all. So you've seen Trump talk about an external revenue service. Well, that's tied to tariffs. Tariffs aren't anything bad. That's just exactly what we did before the existence of the Federal Reserve Bank and the IRS and the FBI. We just used tariffs, and we were the wealthiest we ever were. We didn't have deficits. We didn't have any of these problems. And just because we're 100 years later doesn't mean, oh, they won't work now. They work great. Nobody cared about tariffs when the United States was being the piggy bank for the world. They only care when you say, hey, it's reciprocal now. You want to charge us
Right.
20? We're charging you 20. You want to charge us
Yeah.
100? We're charging you 100. You want 0? Great. You're going to charge us 0. Or you're going to come
Right.
to America, employ Americans, set up your manufacturing, and you can produce domestically. And guess what? 0. So
Yeah.
tariffs are nonsense. And if we use the money from tariffs, we can absolutely eliminate the IRS in completion. And then with
That's
all this other
amazing.
stuff going on in parallel with Doge and, finding all the waste, fraud, and abuse, the idea that it's controversial to shut down waste, fraud, and abuse. The one thing I worry about in our country is our country has no path forward for any reason, even if they abolish the IRS, even if they get rid of the Federal Reserve, which could be replaced by executive order via two things that are going on. One is the filing by the Trump administration with the Supreme Court demanding the ability to fire certain officials throughout the government. Well, one of those, the reason that they're doing that is because Jerome Powell can then be fired by Trump legally. So that's a SCOTUS case. And then separate from that, we created by EO a sovereign wealth fund. Well, a sovereign wealth fund, in conjunction of being a part of the Treasury organization, what did they do? They took USAID inside, then they shut it all down inside the State Department. Gone. Now, what can they do with the Federal Reserve? It's not a government agency, but they can just simply replace the whole thing inside US Treasury with a sovereign wealth fund. And then we could decide to issue our own bonds, our own notes. Specifically, they could back it with gold. They could back it with Bitcoin. They could back it with a hybrid of commodities, including oil, gold, Bitcoin. Or they could decide that they're going to back it with something else. But we don't need a Federal Reserve Bank. It's not
Yeah.
useful.
I would love to see Jerome Powell gone and the whole thing just out of here, because it's about time.
Yeah.
It's like time for a change. People are realizing we don't need it. So when it comes to this whole trade war thing, what's your view on however other countries, like I know Trump paused the tariffs for 90 days, and other countries were starting to say, okay, we're going to back off. We'll give you 0 tariffs. Like people were actually finally backing off, because when you put like a gun to their head, they're going to decide to actually, okay, we don't want to bankrupt our country with your tariffs now, so we'll compromise. But with China, what they're doing by raising even further, like, how do you think this is going to play out in your view?
So, in my view, it's going to be very positive for the United States. So, what's really happening is the United States is in a battle to regain its own sovereignty and its own nation and its own citizens and its own manifest destiny, whatever you want to call it. And it's a war, a financial war. The core of the financial war, you see all this noise. The core of the financial war is the City of London, which is one of the only 3 sovereign territories in the world. One is the Vatican inside Italy. One is the City of London inside England and inside the United Kingdom. And then one is Washington, D.C., which is in America. And the financial war going on is a big battle and a battle to the death. The City of London, the British Crown, and the old colonies from years and years ago is still being played out on a global basis. Most of what's called successor government doctrine dictates the liabilities and assets of most, organizations on Earth, especially countries. So when I say that, what does that mean? So Trump talks a lot about Greenland. Well, that's an extension of Denmark and an extension of the British monarchy. And when you see the talk about Greenland, it's not accidental. The talk about Panama, okay, we talk about relevance to the Chinese. We built it. It's in our, hemisphere, yada, yada, yada. But those are other sort of treaties and commitments and government deals that were made historically that has now been violated. So we say, great, we want Greenland. We want Panama. Why does he say Canada is a state? Well, remember, we had a civil war. So again, successor government doctrine, what survived? The United States. What went away? The Confederacy. Well, the Confederacy had deals with Canada. And at one point, Canada was going to become a state of the Confederacy. So when the Civil War finished, successor government doctrine kicks in. We inherit all the debts, all the obligations, liabilities, and the assets. Well, one of the assets was Canada. And if you look at the Articles of the Confederacy, you can find all this stuff detailed. So a lot of this stuff isn't as weird as it sounds publicly in the way it's positioned in the press. A lot of it is just history that people don't understand, because often history is written by the victors, back to your Gaza, Israel, and all the rest of that nonsense. And so the way I think it's going to play out is as follows. First, huge announcement of tariffs. Everybody reacts. The market reacts. So when the market reacts, let's be very clear about what that means. That is the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the banking cabal internationally, and all the globalists around the world, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, all these unelected bureaucracies, NATO, the European Union. This is the globalists forcibly selling, not because there was some economic need to sell off the market. Remember, who controls all the money? They do. So they dump because they're trying to put so much pressure by the markets blowing up that Trump will do what? He'll reverse course. So that game between the nationalist and the globalist is playing out in the markets. Now, in the markets are going to be wildly better off when we get to the other side of this. In the interim, you're instantly seeing which countries are friendly to the United States, which ones say they're allies but behave as if they're enemies, like the European Union and all the NATO countries. And then you can also see which one tries to get aggressive and goes on the offense. Let's call that China, because that's the only one that really did it. They dug their heels in. We're going to save face. We're going to jack tariffs. We're going to jack tariffs. So the way it's going to play out is I expect you'll see one deal every couple days over the next 90 days. By the way, all the tariffs were not paused for 90 days. The tariffs for the ones that were going to be negotiating new trade deals that came to the table and said, hey, we want a deal for Vietnam. Hey, we want a deal for, El Salvador. Hey, we want a deal for Argentina. Like, those are going to go through a process to all get new trade deals, which is going to be dramatically better for the United States and everybody here. Now, in parallel, you're going to have the NATO EU that wants to stay in war in Ukraine and now have to realize, oh shit, we have to fund this. And oh my God, where are we going to get $1 trillion to fund war? How are we going to build our own military industrial complex? Because now we can't depend on outsourcing the military to the United States. So that whole thing is sort of in between the friendlies, the theoretically friendly allies that really aren't, and then that are also aligned with the globalists. And then over here, you get China. That's the real war, even though the financial war is between the Bank of England and the City of London on one side with all the globalists. And then that's against Besant, U.S. Treasury, and Trump. Now, when I say that, who's Besant? Why does Besant matter as the Treasury Secretary? Well, he was brought on by Trump for a lot of reasons. One of them is that he worked in the City of London and he ran the desk that led to Druckenmiller and Soros breaking the British pound. So back in history, when they got billions and billions of dollars for being right, Besant did the core research that exposed the attack vectors to take down the British pound. And the more convinced they became that they were right, the higher and higher the leverage they were on that bet. And ultimately, the British pound collapsed. And Besant was successful at doing that. And then Druckenmiller and Soros got lots of credit. But Besant was behind the scene. So what Besant was asked when he came into the United States government was twofold. Okay, based on all the attack vectors you use to take down the British pound, look at all the attack vectors you would use to screw over the US dollar, and then protect the United States from that happening. And then in parallel, look over here at China, who's really the bad guys. They're the big superpower that we got to pay attention to. And I want you to look at every attack vector of the Chinese currency, the yuan, the RMB, and I want you to destroy it. So how do you do that? Well, Besant, what is his background? He is one of the most famous, most successful macro hedge fund traders in history, overlaid by being a finance and economics professor and a huge student of the history of everything dealing with finance and economics. So Besson is sitting there and he, you know, sits down at Mar-a-Lago and talks about being Treasury Secretary. And Trump's like, how do we resolve a $36 trillion debt with 1.2 trillion of interest with these horrific trade deals overlaid by $10 trillion that Janet Yellen tried to issue short-term paper to try to screw over the entire United States to get Biden and Harris elected by painting the tape, by routing all that USAID money into the NGOs and nonprofits that we're going to use our own money to destroy ourselves, and issue it all to hire everyone in the government with no private sector jobs and create this false belief that things are good and the economy is rosy and the markets are wonderful leading into the election. So Trump wins.
Yeah.
Now
Leading into squeezing everybody to death.
he has
Yeah.
to unwind all that. Now you're Bessent. Well, if you're Trump and Bessent, what is the best possible route is to shock the markets, plummet the markets down in price. People flee the equities, they buy treasuries. So when you buy treasuries, the price of the treasuries go up, which makes the yields plummet. So when the yields plummet, that 10-year bond price, that's the thing that matters. It was up over 5. Bessent starts doing all this, and at one point it was down to like 3.8. So if you're trying to refinance $10 trillion with a gun to your head in the first 6 to 12 months that you're in office, how are you going to get interest rates down to refinance all that money? Well, terrify the world, blow up the markets, flee to safety to get into treasuries. Treasuries go up in price, bond yields plummet, interest rates drop, and every 1 basis point, there's 100 basis points in a percent, 1 basis point is $1 billion of savings on the interest. Because remember, 1.2 trillion of interest, 100 billion per month. So that becomes the game plan. And then what did Trump say even over the weekend? I didn't back off any tariffs. So what are you talking about? I backed off tariffs. He said, okay, for those that already said we're going to negotiate a new deal, I'm giving a 90-day window for us to do the new deal. And our tariffs were in place and we're going to resolve this. Great. Everyone's operating in good faith. We'll get better deals. For China, we're not doing anything. Like, screw you. So then also when you're trying to say, okay, what about an exception for phones or for electronics or for these things? He came back out and clarified, I didn't say that was going away. Because who do the tariffs really hurt? Americans? Not at all. It makes us richer as a country. The tariffs hurt this global cabal who are trying to optimize for corporate profits, the corporatocracy. It hurts Apple. It hurts Nike. It hurts people that have decided to shut down everything in America, put it all overseas, and they're optimizing their earnings per share. So those tariffs, you have to move goods between one corporation to another. They're paying the tariffs. So what does it do? It drops the earnings per share of Nike, drops the earnings per share of Apple. When the earnings per share drop, share price drops. So when Bessent came out and said, this is a Mag 7 problem, not a MAGA problem, he knew exactly what he's talking about, because the tariffs are going to flow to the U.S. Treasury. The people paying them are really going to be the corporations. And usually he's looked at study after study, the original Trump 45 tariffs against China. MIT did an amazing study about that. And what they found was that the increase to consumers in the United States of the 10% tariffs was about 0.7%. The rest of the tariffs, half of them were eaten in the currency markets by exchange rates, and the other half were absorbed by either the governments or the corporations doing trade. So he said, why am I afraid that this is going to be inflationary? Are you kidding me? And you
Well,
see,
because I think people think that, oh, with all the stuff that because everything got outsourced to China, that now everything's going to cost more. And then I think people worry that for entrepreneurs starting new businesses, like how will they just find other countries to operate in that isn't China, so that we can get away from that whole thing and just find other places, or just try to produce it here. But there's no, I think a lot of the tooling, I think, is an issue in the US. But I think other than that, people worry that we used to get cheap prices, but we have to just pay a little bit more. But people don't think of the big picture. They're not
Well,
thinking
if
that.
I told you that by getting the tariffs, your income tax goes to zero, will that help families? The answer is hell yes. And ironically, you're seeing inflation plummet. You're not seeing inflation spike. So the exact opposite of what they said will happen. And again, because the media is controlled by the same globalists that control the money. They are seeding the narrative in the story. They're terrified of Trump being right, even though he is right, because we have history that already teaches us what happens with tariffs. Guess what else we have history? Hard sound money versus soft unsound money. We know what that looks like as well. So when you get back to what is money, the people with all the media companies and all the cash, they don't want you to know that. They
Mhm.
make a lot of money off of all of our collective stupidity of saying, hey, Staci and I are married. Staci and I are both going to work. We haven't seen our kids in God knows how long. We're going to trust that the education system is going to do well by us as parents in K through 12, even though they're going to give junior a sex change operation without telling us, or they're going to bring in offensive sexuality books and read it to my fifth grader who needs to know all about men with penises and all this other nonsensical, disgusting stuff. And oh, by the way, the debaucherous side of society is done by design. This isn't accidental. This,
It's almost like the feminism or like the feminizing of males and stuff, like all that stuff where it's just like everything you see in media is just changing the way they try to like push that on you. But it's like the
but
same thing of
nobody actually believes it. But what they're doing is flooding the airwaves. It's like Disney. I could add $100 billion to Disney's market cap in under 30 days if they would appoint me as the CEO tomorrow. I would walk in, I would get in front of every television, and I would say, I'm Alan Knitowski. I'm the new CEO of Disney. I'm thrilled to be here. And as a parent myself, I am here to apologize to all of you. Every parent out there around the world, we have disgusting television content. We have disgusting film content. Everything we are doing is abusing children. We are doing bad things in a bad way, and we are not going to allow this ever again. You will feel safe at our theme parks, reading our books, our television, our movies. But when you realize Disney is controlled by its shareholders, which are controlled by the same families, all of this is not real or organic, much like with USAID and Doge. None of the protests are organic. Everything is fake. The economy is fake. The jobs are fake. The outrage is fake. It's like the Truman Show.
I literally was going to say that as you said it.
And we sit here, and what's really happening is that all these interests that align under the guise of wealth and power at the expense of humanity need to be held accountable. So when I said like our country has no path forward, it really has none unless we get hard sound money as a base. But more importantly, accountability, responsibility, horrific accountability is mandatory. If they don't
And
take the
discipline.
January 6th and the 2020 election fraud, they don't take the COVID crimes against humanity, the sedition and treason and Operation Crossfire Hurricane, they don't go after all of the USAID, Doge, fraud, they don't go after all these things if there are not severe consequences. And when I say that, here's what I mean. If you committed crimes against humanity, sex trafficking, human trafficking, COVID, and all the lies and bullshit using us as guinea pigs worldwide, that crime against humanity requires death as the punishment. When you get into sedition and treason, overthrowing the elected government of the United States, that is punishable by death in the Constitution. That those crimes, everything on that side of the screen, death. That's what we need. On this side of the screen, it's okay to say, okay, fraud, waste, abuse, racketeering, IRS tax fraud, take your pick. Every one of those other crimes should require financial disgorgement and probably prison, depending on the severity. If you're Stacey Abrams and you're in Georgia and you took $1 billion from the United States under your NGO that was set up 2 weeks before the Biden-Harris administration leaves, and you're cashing out, buying your homes and doing all this craze, it's like BLM, right? Big, large mansions, all fraud. If those folks are not held accountable by taking the profits that they got illicitly,
That's what I think.
and if they don't have a crime, America's not going to work because we'll have 2 tiers of justice. Everyone can now see they're doing D-class left and right to show you what happened, with JFK's assassination, MLK's assassination. We've had 2 presidents that have been real, JFK and Trump. Everyone in between, that's the uniparty. Bush, all the people around them like Cheney and Romney on the right, and on the left with Obama and Clinton and Biden and Harris. You don't get to play these games consequence free. And oh, by the way, you don't get to do crimes against children and humanity over here as Diddy and Epstein, and you get a pass. No, sorry, nope. And that means all these things that get very interrelated from 9/11 and 10/7, now you got to deal with the Israel problem. And it's not anti-Semitic to call Israel a problem. There is no benefit the United States gets from its relationship with Israel. We get wars against every country Israel wants to go to war against. Yemen, done. Somalia, done. Sudan, done. Syria, done. Iraq, done. Who do they want to do now? Iran. These aren't our
And it's
wars.
crazy because it's not our wars. It's not even the Israel. It's not their wars. It's not Jewish people. It's the party, the politicians, and everyone knows. Like everyone says, I hate politicians. But all of a sudden, when it comes down to now that Trump is trying to do something to free us of this, the taxes, and all they look at is the short term where the markets are falling, and they think, oh, he's just trying to enrich himself. And though that's the narrative that's being spun right now.
That's the public puppet version of the problem. The real problem are the rogue intelligence agencies operating on behalf of the power grid of money. And when you realize Israel was created as an MI6 operation in conjunction with Lord Rothschild and the British monarchy to create the state of Israel as a permanent wedge issue forever in the Middle East, suddenly a lot gets answered very quickly. When you realize the rogue intelligence agencies in the United States, all the 3-letter agencies, are corrupt, compromised, and criminal, and they're operating a global mafia. When you realize that the cartels report to the CIA, when you realize the military is getting deployed to protect opium fields in Afghanistan, when you realize that we got to keep the heroin trade going, and this goes back into the Vietnam War and in Southeast Asia. I could go on and on and on. Iran-Contra. We're going to trade the drugs for weapons, and we're going to create off-grid budgets that nobody can ever find so that nobody has any oversight. And then wherever we need to, we're going to use blackmail. And their favorite blackmail, it isn't just gambling. It isn't just sexuality with, women or men. It isn't just drugs or gambling or whatever your vice is. Their ultimate blackmail is centered around children and pedophilia. And that is the harshest of all realities. So when you hear people say we're ruled by satanic pedophiles, it's really not a joke. But when you watch that, when you look at, let's take the president of France and his wife. Brigitte Macron is not a woman. Brigitte Macron was a groomer who's a guy who actually was the instructor for Macron when he was in school, sexualized him, became his handler, put on women's clothing, and now they're the president and first lady of France.
I did not know this.
And if you went through, we could probably have the same conversation about Barack and Big Mike Obama. It's the same stuff. There are, you look at Carney who wasn't even Canadian. Trudeau magically disappears, right? Which is really just Fidel Castro's illegitimate son with swinger mom, Mrs. Castro, who was a known swinger for decades, going off to the clubs of New York and meeting with the Rolling Stones and hooking up with musicians. Heck, you can go through when Trudeau's father was actually married. They went on their honeymoon. There was like 21 stops. Canadian press followed for 20 of 21. There was only one that the press disappeared and they went on their own. Do you know where they went? They went to Cuba. Who'd they spend time with? Fidel Castro. When was Justin born? 9 months later. Who does he look like? His dad or Fidel Castro? Like, so many of these things aren't accidents. But if you look at Carney now, the new Canadian prime minister waiting for the elections, he's married to a guy. What was his job before he just took over Canada, supposedly? He was running the Bank of England. And now we get right back to the same old shit. What's the first photo that surfaced of Carney and his wife, who's a guy, at the Bank of England? Where do we see it? Who was he photographed with when he first took over the Bank of England? Ghislaine Maxwell. Wow, the coincidences are
Yeah.
off the chart. What could
Wow, that's
possibly
a lot
be?
of connections.
So, like, this is what I'm saying. The handling, Israel is here. Mossad, which is really the intelligence arm of the Rothschilds, under the guise of a fake nation state. Mossad has got their paws on everything. October 7th, where they did the Hannibal Directive and killed their own people to create a false flag. Israel is the most guarded by land, sea, and air in history, and there's a 0% chance they sat for 8 hours doing absolutely nothing unless they wanted it to happen. 9/11, same thing. Those are controlled demolitions. Same nonsense.
Yeah.
Not one, but two attempts on Trump's life, on the assassination. You get into all of history. JFK, like, we could go on and on. Then Diddy,
Yeah.
Epstein. It's all Israel. It's all Mossad, all the time, everywhere. And Ghislaine's
That's
father was
crazy.
Robert Maxwell, who was basically a spy, who was a billionaire operating out of the UK and was working for Israel.
This has been such a great conversation. I also want to remind people that when they hear you talk, because I feel like we have so much we can cover and talk about. So if you ever want to come back again, I
Sure,
would
we
love
could
to
do it
have you
another
back.
time.
But I want to remind people that this is coming from an ex-army ranger, who has been in finance, or not finance, but in the tech world. He's been in, all these amazing companies you've started, and but you've been through it all and you've seen all these things. But seeing that you came from that army background, you were a ranger. To be talking the way you're talking is because, you went to work for your country. You went and risked your life for your country, and for you to be talking about the things that are wrong with this country is because you are trying to find out answers. You went and did what you did. You sacrificed a lot. You risked your life. And when you start seeing that all these connections, even though people might not believe some things and think they may be conspiracies, a lot of conspiracies have come out to be true in the last couple
Here's
of
a fun
years,
fact.
so
Where did the term conspiracy theory come from? Who originated it and what event caused it? So the word and the phrase conspiracy theory was created by the CIA, and it first was used the week after JFK was assassinated. So go back and look at history, and whenever you hear the term conspiracy theory, you ought to just assume that you're right over target, because the CIA created that on a known hit that our own government, Lyndon Johnson, who was going to be thrown off the 1964 ballot, was the one responsible for killing John F. Kennedy, while being supported by none other than George Bush Sr., who was at the CIA at the time, on behalf of the CIA intelligence and the military industrial complex, including Mossad in Israel. And how do I know that? That is widely, more information is now out, but you don't commit the 5 cardinal sins and get away with it. JFK refused to escalate the war in Vietnam. What happened as soon as Johnson was in? We escalated the war in Vietnam. JFK, what did he do? He was going to shut down the CIA and the rogue intelligence agencies. And the problem, especially after they tried to get him to blow up a bomb in Miami so they could try, after the Bay of Pigs failed, to get public support to do an invasion of Cuba to take out Castro. Third event was he issued $5 billion of silver-backed treasury notes, not from the Rothschild Federal Reserve, but from the Treasury. And that was a big no-no because now you mess with the banking cartel. And the fourth thing, which is fun, was holding Israel responsible for the espionage and theft of all of our nuclear secrets from Los Alamos. And he demanded that they shut down their nuclear testing in Israel. And he embarrassed the prime minister, who was the founder of Israel, so much, Ben-Gurion, that he resigned, and Mossad never forgave him for the treatment of the founder of Israel. So this stuff is so unbelievably widely more known. And I encourage everyone, there's a few books they should read if they want to know stuff. Go read Whitney Webb's One Nation Under Blackmail, volumes 1 and 2.
Okay.
That's the full history of intelligence intersecting with organized crime, Wall Street banking and central banking, and then Washington, D.C. politics with all the receipts. First volume goes from early 1900s until Robert Maxwell is mysteriously killed on a yacht in the Caribbean, or excuse me, out in the Mediterranean. And then volume 2 takes over when Jeffrey Epstein, handled by his daughter Ghislaine Maxwell, takes over the arms trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and sex trafficking operations of Dad on behalf of Israel to blackmail celebrities, monarchs, and politicians in the West.
So that was One Nation Under Blackmail. What's the other? Do you have
the other
other
one is
suggestions?
Confessions of an Economic Hitman by Perkins. And when you see that, that is the blueprint of how we debt enslave non-G7 countries by having an unlimited credit facility at the Federal Reserve that gets routed to the World Bank. And then the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, will take that money from the World Bank and loan it under the guise of infrastructure and development to help these countries in need. And all they do by design is give them too much debt, enrich a few people, and then force them to either vote the way we want, drop a military base, steal all their gold, their rare earth elements, their oil, their gas, whatever it is. And he'll walk through the entire blueprint from A to Z of how they do it, why they do it, and exact examples of all over the world where he was involved in doing it.
Well, we have a book club as one of our communities on our X group, right? So I'm gonna be suggesting these to them. So this is gonna be great because all these things they follow why we found out about Bitcoin and found out about truth and what we really want to move toward and get out of this cycle. This terrible, evil, horrible cycle that we've been stuck in for so long that we're escaping from.
Amen.
So these are definitely going to be suggestions for the book club. So that is amazing. Do you have any other suggestions, or were those the two big ones?
Well, those are the two big ones I think to start with. Michael Lewis is a great author. Like I said, if you want to learn about wealth management and how you should take sovereignty of your wealth management, Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis is the other sort of gateway to Bitcoin and sovereignty. And of course, like the Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Amos, you have to read it, even if you're reading the first 7 chapters, to understand the history of money. What is a collectible? What is a store of value? What is a medium of exchange? What is a unit of account or unit of measure? The first 7 chapters don't even talk about Bitcoin. It's just the history of the world of money, because we have to fix the money to fix the world. And a lot of what we talked about today, from the power and the greed and the money and the death and the blackmail and all these ugly topics, they all interrelate about what happens when you have the money and power, or whether you can pervert the money and power.
Yep. I love that. That is so amazing. I love all the topics we covered. We've gone through a lot of amazing things today. I cannot wait to post this. I'm definitely not going to take so long to post it because I'm moving ahead with these. So I'm actually going to get it out sooner than I originally thought I would be able to. So thank you again for joining me. I can't wait to interact with you on X. I'll be posting these links below, and I'll be sharing your page as well. And I can't wait to check out the Flywheel and share it with people. So I am going to be doing that. That is amazing that you're doing that. So thank you again for joining me today. And I will link all that stuff in the video.
Sounds great. Look forward to doing it again.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.